Hello, everyone. Welcome to the latest edition of the Arbury Road podcast with myself, Dermot, as always. This week, we are going to be speaking about the elections in Bulgaria, what they mean for the European Union, what they mean for the government in Bulgaria, and most importantly, what they mean for your Bulgarian citizens. So, to speak about this with me today, I am lucky enough to be joined by Daniel Yanev, a Bulgarian national living in Berlin, studying political science at Potsdam University. Having organized some anti-government protests in Berlin last year, anti-Bulgarian government protests, of course, Daniel co-founded the Citizens Initiative for Democracy in Bulgaria, along with some other protest organizers in German cities. Daniel, thank you very much for being with me this afternoon. How are you doing?
I'm fine. Hello.
Fantastic. Let's get straight down to business. So before we speak about the election and the results, can you give us a bit of an overview of the political situation in Bulgaria over the last number of years and decades?
Well, that's a pretty tricky question, actually. I don't know how to begin, but probably to begin with, Bulgaria is a member of the EU since 2007 and has been ruled by a conservative government, a pro-European conservative government since 2009, with one interruption or two interruptions, I think, which were not so long after all. We also have an opposition, a strong opposition, the so-called Bulgarian Socialist Party, which is more or less originated from the Bulgarian Communist Party. So another interesting fact is that Bulgaria was a communist country from 1945 to 1989, just like other countries from Central Europe, for example, Hungary, Poland, and so on. So what else? Yeah, the government, which was last in office, was composed of two parties. This conservative party, the so-called GERB party, which is pro-European, is part of the European People's Party in the European Parliament, and their junior partner, the Nationalists, or the so-called United Patriots, which did not win any parliamentary seats at the last parliamentary election, which was last Sunday, actually. So I think that that's a nice overview to begin with.
That's perfect, Daniel. Yeah, thanks for that. So I have a list of the estimated results. So we're expecting the full results to come out later this afternoon or this evening, I believe. But at the moment, from what I've seen, we have an all-time low turnout of just over 47%. We have GERB party that you mentioned, the party in power, with about 24, 25. The Socialists on 15, the ITN on 18, and then you've got a couple of parties coming in with 10, the Democratic Bulgarian Party and the Turkish Minority Party. Who are the big winners and the losers from these elections so far?
Well, I think it's clear from the results that the current government is probably the biggest loser at this election. They have lost about 20 seats in parliament. Another loser is also the Bulgarian Socialist Party, which is the most influential and the strongest opposition party in the Bulgarian parliament, which have lost 37 seats in parliament, which is unprecedented actually in the last years. That's probably their worst performance at elections at all, I think, in the new history of Bulgaria, so to speak. So another loser are, of course, the United Patriots, which were part of government and did not win any single parliamentary seat at this election. Yeah, so they're also out, and I think that that's a clear message from the people that they want some change, some general change, and more or less, the results of this election could be perceived as a form of protest, actually. So those are the biggest losers. They are perceived as part of the status quo. The GERB party, the Socialists, which were also in government from 2005 and 2009, and many Bulgarians are, did not approve their government, so to speak. So I think that's a clear message. So those are the losers.
Okay. In terms of the issues then, I mean, I assume COVID was a big issue, but there's also corruption is pretty synonymous with Bulgarian politics in a European perspective. They're ranked as the lowest, the highest level of political corruption in the EU. which was the biggest driving force behind this desire for change? Was it the COVID restrictions and the way the government have behaved themselves, or was it more anti-corruption?
Well, I would not say that the electoral campaign was dominated by a single topic, actually, at least on part of the voters in Bulgaria. I would say that corruption and COVID-19 were equally important. It's an interesting fact that Bulgaria is one of the countries in Europe with the lightest restrictions. I don't think that a lockdown was imposed at all in Bulgaria at any point of time since March 2020. So I would say that, as I already mentioned, that the result of the election is originates from this general discontent, this general disapproval, not only with the Bulgarian government, with the current Bulgarian government of GERB and the nationalists, but in general. People just are just sick of the way politics are being done in Bulgaria. So they expected their living standard to be increased, so to speak. The last government failed in doing that. As I said, they are in office since 2009, and they did not do that. They could not increase, for example, the wages. I mean, the average wage, for example, or the average pension. I mean, Bulgaria has really much potential, and in comparison to similar countries from an economical point of view, like Romania, for example, or I don't know, Hungary, Poland, and so on, Bulgaria is performing worse than they are performing. So actually, many Bulgarians have also left Bulgaria in the last 10 years, I would say, and the election results from Bulgarians living abroad are also clear. I mean, the GERB party has about, I don't know, it's on the fourth or on the fifth place compared to Bulgaria, where they actually won the election. So as I said, this general discontent, this general desire for change was really the driving force behind, the election results.
Okay. So as you mentioned there, the GERB party, they still did win the election, but it's very much a loss for them. I think that's fair to say, down 10 or 12 points. How do we expect this to impact GERB and, of course, Prime Minister Borissov?
Well, an interesting thing is that Borissov gave up his seat in parliament. He was actually leading two of the lists of GERB in two electoral districts. He won these districts actually, but he gave up his seat in parliament, and he will most probably just remain leader of the GERB party.
Okay, what's the motivation behind giving up his seat?
Because I think that the disapproval levels of Borissov are too high, and his party would suffer if he remains a candidate for the prime minister position, so to speak. But as I said, he will most probably remain the leader of the GERB party, and the party won't suffer much, I would say, because it still has the support of their European partners, mostly the European People's Party, and the big European, the big conservative and pro-European political parties like the Christian Democrats in Germany also continue supporting Borissov, in spite of the allegations that he is involved in corruption, and despite of the fact that media freedom in Bulgaria is restricted and so on. He still has support, and I would say that GERB will still remain a strong political party. They have many mayors in Bulgaria. They have won 24 out of 31 electoral districts at these elections. So they're really strong on the local and on the regional level. And they will remain in opposition. Borissov would most probably, I would say, with 100% probability, won't be a prime minister of Bulgaria anymore, but GERB will still remain influential in Bulgarian politics.
Yeah, no doubt they'll still have a big influence. Who are the big winners then? Because anyone from outside of Bulgaria who's paid any attention to this election has been made aware of the ITN, the new populist, if you will, pro-European party. Can you tell us a bit about them? What sort of an election they had and the background, the leader? It's a very interesting party.
It is a really interesting story, really. So to begin with, they won 51 seats in the Bulgarian parliament. So I don't know their vote share, but they're the second strongest party in parliament now. How, where did where does the party originate from? Its leader is a former, really popular TV host and a musician also. I mean, his TV show was more like, I don't know, I could compare it to Jimmy Fallon's show in the US, for example. It was, yeah,
Talk show.
really in this time. I really also enjoyed watching it when I was a child, also because he has hosted this TV show, I think, for 15 or 20 years, a really long time. It won't be exaggerated if I say that this person is one of the most popular Bulgarians at all at the moment. So he and his screenwriters, they were politically, they have taken political stances on many issues for years now. And their political engagement began actually with a referendum in Bulgaria, which took place in 2016, I think, where the leader is called Slavi Trifonov. So that's the leader of ITN. And they asked the Bulgarians three questions. The first question was if they want to replace the proportional electoral system with a majoritarian one, if they want voting on at referendums and elections to be compulsory. And the third question was if people want to reduce the party subsidy, so the party financing, to 1 leva, or about 50 euro cents per vote. And back then, I think that the subsidy was 12 leva, or respectively 6 euros per vote, okay, for the parties which have won more than 1% vote share at elections. So that was more or less a populist proposal on part of the ITN, on part of Trifonov and his screenwriters. But the voter turnout was relatively high, almost 50%, and all questions were supported with, a significant majority. Okay. So that's how it all began. Slavi Trifonov's show was on national television. I think that 2017 or 2018, he left the television and founded his own television, and it started functioning more or less like the party television of the ITN. I mean, the ITN did not exist back then, but there were indications that they will found a party, and that happened in 2020. In February 2020, ITN was founded, and as you already said, it does not have a clear political orientation. It's neither left nor right. It's more like a big tent party, like I would say, the Five-Star Movement in Italy. It's if you compare it to the Five-Star Movement, you will see many similarities. But the party has stated it is clearly pro-European, clearly pro-NATO, at least in its foreign policy agenda. And yeah, it also promotes more direct democracy. So that would mean that more referendums would become laws, that the procedure of referendums, the results of referendums becoming laws would be eased, so to speak. So that's actually, in a nutshell, what ITN stands for. They would remain conservative, I would say, regarding LGBT rights, for example, and the traditional family rights and so on. So yeah, but in a nutshell, that's what ITN stands for, I would say.
Okay, sticking with that topic of LGBT and family rights and these kind of themes, is Bulgaria as strong on these themes as the likes of Hungary and Poland? Does Borissov align himself with the likes of Orban, or what are his views?
Well, on these topics, I would say yes. I mean, he does not exploit these topics as strongly as Orban or I don't know, politicians in Poland do. But since he has governed the country in the last 4 years with nationalists, which are clearly anti-LGBT, he expresses such kind of opinions. That, I mean, for example, I don't know, LGBT marriages are prohibited in Bulgaria, and in the near future they will most probably not remain prohibited, so to speak. So that is actually a topic in Bulgaria. It has been a topic in the last years. There is a convention, the so-called Istanbul Convention, for the rights of women. It deals with violence at home,
domestic violence. Yeah.
domestic violence. Sorry, exactly, directed at women. Uh, and the nationalists just interpreted the content of this convention in their favor, stating that the convention wants to introduce a third gender and wants to, yeah, I don't know. They really exploited that, and that turned into a really, really hot topic in Bulgaria, and could also have been, I don't know, the trigger for some people to vote for this party, actually. So yeah, Borissov is trying to compromise, so not stating clearly that he's anti-LGBT in order not to anger his European partners. But yeah, I mean, many Bulgarians are still conservative, and at some LGBT demonstrations, for example, violence, you could witness violence actually, some radical rights or extreme representatives of the extreme right um, really yeah, try to how do you say to stop the demonstrations actually.
Yeah.
So Bulgaria as a whole, as a society, is still really conservative and more or less anti LGBT rights.
Okay. Turning our attention then to some of the relationships, you mentioned Borissov has the support of the Christian Democrats in Germany, the EPP, in the Conservatives in the European Parliament. What about the relationship with Putin and with Russia? There's my understanding of Bulgaria is that it's still one of the countries in Europe where there's a bit of a battle going on between Brussels and Moscow looking to have influence. How are these two relationships viewed by Bulgarian people?
Well, to start with, many Bulgarian people, especially older Bulgarians, I would say over 50 years of age, which have lived during communist times, experience some nostalgia, some nostalgic feelings, and politicians on some occasions try to exploit that. And Borisov is actually one of these politicians. He is trying to play the role, at least in my opinion, of a mediator between Europe, I mean, the most fierce opponents of Putin and Russian interventions in European politics, so to speak, and Russia on the other side. And you can see that in, I mean, there are several large-scale energy projects going on in Bulgaria right now. The so-called Turkish Stream actually is a gas pipeline which runs from Turkey through Bulgaria going to Serbia, and which has to actually deliver gas to Europe, not through the Ukraine. So it's a new gas pipeline with which Russia tries to reduce Ukraine's influence, so to speak, from a geopolitical point of view. So yeah, there is a battle going on, I would say. On the one hand, you have Bulgarians who like Russia, love Russia, they know Russian and like the Russian culture, and politicians exploit that. On the other hand, you have the Bulgarian Socialist Party, which, as I said, originated from the Bulgarian Communist Party and is, I mean, among the influential, the strong political parties, the only one which promotes an improvement of the relationship between Bulgaria and Russia. So there is a battle going on, and the new political constellation in parliament could change, I mean, the dimensions of this conflict, but nobody knows. As I said, ITN is the second strongest party now with 51 seats in parliament, and has clearly stated that it will pursue a pro-European agenda. But as I said, nobody knows.
Yeah, perfect. So let's focus in there. You mentioned the Bulgarian Socialist Party that descended from the Communist Party. Do we know why their elections were so bad? It's quite surprising that it was
Yeah.
particularly bad, no?
Well, I think that many people perceive the Bulgarian Socialist Party as part of the status quo, so to
Okay.
speak. I mean, the Bulgarian Socialist Party was in government between 2005 and 2009. During these times, Bulgaria became a member of the European Union. It had actually a really decent economic growth. I mean, more than the European average at this time. And in spite of that, corruption was still a problem, and was not solved as a problem at this times, and also other things like to raise the living standard. I mean, this economic growth was not distributed equally to all Bulgarians. Still, many Bulgarians still remained poor, so to speak. There is also the phenomenon of the working poor in Bulgaria, which people which are part of the labor force, but um, have wages which are lower than the, how do you call it,
The living wage, let's
the
say.
living wage, exactly. So many people are discontent also with the Bulgarian Socialist Party. And another factor, the Bulgarian Socialist Party was the most influential opposition party from 2009 to 2021. I mean, for 12 years, and could not change much, so to speak. So many people do not believe that they could bring about change, about general change in Bulgarian politics, and that's why they did not vote for them. Also, another interesting fact, yeah, the leader of the Bulgarian Socialist Party, Cornelia Ninova is her name, has more or less a controversial political past. So he was, I mean, a vice minister in the cabinet of Ivan Kostov, which is actually the first um, government without the Bulgarian Socialist Party in 1997, the first government after Bulgaria um, triggered market reforms and turned from a planned economy to a market economy. Um, and yeah, she was also involved in other scandals, and I personally do not think that many people believe her.
Yeah, I saw she kind of isolated herself even within the party, it seems. There were a lot of controversies over the last couple of months and years. All right, last question. So I don't want to put a gun to your head and force you to make solid predictions, but what do we expect to see in terms of the new government? Is it going to be, you reckon it won't be Borissov? Are ITN going to take the reins and make things interesting?
Well, I mean, according to to the Bulgarian constitution, the president of Bulgaria has to afford a mandate to form a government to the strongest party. I mean, the party with the highest vote share in the election. So now, I mean, this should happen on the 11th of April when the final results of the elections will be published, so to speak, by the Bulgarian Electoral Commission, Central Electoral Commission. So GERB would most probably not be able to form a government because all other parties are anti-GERB. No party is ready to do that. So the second thing which comes is for the president to afford this mandate to the ITN. And the ITN has already stated that it won't form a coalition with GERB, with the Bulgarian Socialists, and with the party of the Turkish minority, which is the so-called Movement for Rights and Freedoms. So without those three parties, the ITN cannot form a majority. Other parties in parliament, like the Democratic Bulgaria, which pursues more or less an anti-status quo and anti-communist agenda, have also stated, I mean, it was the day after the election, that they would also not form a coalition of any form with the socialists, with GERB, and the party of the Turkish minority. So in my opinion, most probably early elections will take place in the early autumn, or yeah, in the late autumn. I don't know. And the only possibility of a government to survive, it won't be a stable government, would be to all parties which are against the former government of Borisov, yeah, to build a coalition which would make important changes to the electoral code in Bulgaria. And what I mean by that, I mean that elections in Bulgaria are still more or less manipulated. I mean, you can buy votes. There are people which live in slums, for example, in which actually are not interested in politics. Their living standards are not so high. People, how do you say, with less income, so to speak. And those people are being paid to vote for a certain party, and that's a thing which GERB. There are allegations, of course. There are no exact proof that GERB actually exploits and wins votes in this way. So a major and important change of the electoral code would consist in introducing video surveillance of vote counting, so to speak, so that this manipulations end. Another thing is to introduce also postal voting or electronic voting. This is not possible in Bulgaria according to the current electoral code. And another important thing also is that there is a restriction to open polling stations in countries outside of the EU, which means that Bulgarian in the United Kingdom or in the US cannot open more than 35 polling stations, which is, and this election showed it, really not sufficient, actually. And there are about 1.2 to 2 million Bulgarians living abroad. There are some estimations. There is no exact figure, but as I said, the turnout abroad is really, really low because of that, so to speak, because there are not enough polling stations, and that's a thing that has to be changed. So that's, in my opinion, and also in the opinions of many political scientists which have spoken in television in Bulgaria, the only possibility is to build such an unstable coalition which would change the electoral code. All of the political parties, except of GERB, of course, have stated they want to start a revision of all public procurement projects and big projects, so to speak, of GERB. But this would take a long time. And I mean, a government cannot exist focusing only on a single topic. So that won't be possible in the long run. So yeah, my personal expectation is actually that we would either have early elections, which will be organized as soon as possible, or we will have a government consisting of ITN, the Bulgarian Socialists, Democratic Bulgaria, and there is also a small party called Rise Up, Thugs Out. It's the smallest party in the current parliament. They would form some kind of an unstable government which would change the electoral code. That's the only possibility. So that's what I expect, actually.
Perfect. I'm excited to see what happens. It's a very interesting election for a lot of reasons. I think we're going to leave it there. Daniel, Yanev, thanks a million for joining me. That was some really insightful, really interesting analysis of the situation in Bulgaria. I encourage everyone to go and check out the initiative, the Citizens Initiative on Democracy in Bulgaria. Get involved. I'm sure there will be more protests coming in the near future. And that's everything from me. We'll be back early next week with the next edition of the podcast. Have a nice day, everyone.